Hi, everyone. I'm a senior researcher at the Lovelace Institute, where I lead our work on ethics and accountability in practice. And particularly today, I wanted to talk through an example and some lessons we've learned from a particular case we've seen, thinking about algorithmic impact assessments, particularly in the context of healthcare. So here I'm thinking about the challenges around governing algorithms as opposed to, per se, algorithmic governance. But as we've seen, these kind of approaches are very much being thought about in the context of governing the algorithms we might be using in algorithmic governance. And so I think you'll hopefully see how those two things come together. So there were three challenges I wanted to explore. They're not exhaustive. Obviously, we could talk about other things like accountability and transparency. But today I thought three things in particular to draw your attention to. One being anticipation. So as we saw brilliantly in Roger's example, when things go wrong, we often end up sat there thinking, how did they not think about this beforehand? Why didn't they see it coming? Why did they not weigh this as a risk more highly? And that relates to the other two, and that we often are concerned that, around participation, who was in the room when those product and governance decisions were made? How likely are they to be impacted by the system's use, and how are those folks who are likely to be impacted involved in governance, and how do we bridge communities and developers? And then facilitation, how do we support product research and development teams to have these conversations? It's not part of the usual process. There's no good script for raising these kinds of concerns. How do we go beyond a checkbox and facilitate nuanced discussion and consideration and make that the norm? So algorithmic impact assessments are a tool for assessing the possible societal impacts of an algorithmic system before the system is in use, with ongoing monitoring and often advised. They've come up a lot in policy and industry discussion, and there's a lot of interest around them, but we're still at a stage where there's no standardized methodology. They've been proposed primarily for public sector use case and to be mandated in legislation, but the current kind of live example of that is the Canadian government's algorithmic impact assessment, which I think we'll hear about a little bit more in today's agenda. But that obviously only gives us so many chances to see how this could work and to test out kind of different ways that it could work best. So when we were thinking about ways of assessing and inspecting algorithmic systems, and particularly algorithmic impact assessments, at the same time, the NHS AI Lab were thinking about what their processes for data governance might be, and how they could better include societal impact considerations in them, particularly around the National Medical Imaging Platform, which is a proposed large-scale data set of medical images, so things like CT scans, MRI scans, even just photographs of skin or parts of the body, where researchers and kind of private companies would be able to apply for access to that NHS data to train, test, and validate AI products. But there's a question of what needs to happen in that data access process to give confidence around this algorithmic governance question. And so this is where, through a series of research which involved interviewing many stakeholders, getting up to speed in all of the latest thinking around impact assessment methodologies. It's a long story there, which you can read about in the paper. We kind of came to this algorithmic impact assessment process, and I'd love to go through it, but we're not going to have time. So two things I'd love to zone in on to kind of think about how we looked at addressing some of these challenges is one, this thing of the reflexive exercise. So how do we take a process like an impact assessment and take it beyond being a form that you're looking to fill in, and the goal is to delegate it to someone to fill it in as efficiently as possible, and actually to a process that supports that conversation in a room, so that the primary part of the process is actually the discussion amongst product team members or amongst developers and data scientists, and that written form that we see at the end is really the kind of the after bit, the artifact as a result of that discussion, and how do we move that piece? And this is where we saw we kind of designed a reflexive exercise oriented around that discussion first, and this is a tool for facilitating that discussion and then documenting it, as opposed to kind of form first thinking. And then the second piece is the participatory workshop. So most proposals around algorithmic impact assessment involve some kind of participation or consultation of the public, but there's still a lot of questions about what that looks like in practice. And one option we've explored here is taking a citizens jury methodology, which we co-produced with ADA's wonderful public engagement team, with the intention of providing a proper structure for participation that many people that we interviewed really struggled. So how do we actually broaden who gets involved in identifying potential harms and impacts, and make sure that a wide range of people are involved in that discussion and that decision, so that it's not coming through that narrow pre-existing lens. And so nonetheless, there's still a lot of things unanswered. We have one proposed process, which we're very excited the NHS-AI lab are looking to trial later this year. But from this, we learned there are lots of questions in terms of people looking for designing these types of processes in different contexts. And I'd love to bring these to the discussions later today, varying from who's in a position to conduct the assessment and who can act and will act as a decision-making about the suitability of an AIA once it's filled in, who says this is an acceptable level of impact and this is not. What kind of groundwork is necessary before or after completing a process like this, where people have discussed the idea of stakeholder impact assessments as a precursor to a process like this. How to identify who needs to be in a room, and then what's the output? What's the kind of piece that people want to be able to see to access for transparency, thinking about Natalia's great work on the UK transparency standard. How do we intersect and relate these kind of outputs? And then on the how do we navigate the immaturity of the wider assessment ecosystem? There aren't qualified assessors we can rely on to do this work, and ensure meaningful participation, as I mentioned, being a core question for us. And then how do we resource, evaluate, and iterate trials? How do we learn more about these processes ongoing and accept that they may not be perfect first time through? So I hope that's given a little bit insight into some approaches to our challenges. And I think I will probably be letting you back to lunch, but thank you for having me remotely.